Welcome to JavaScript Programming Concept 7. In this video, we're going to explore how to model objects in our problem using a concept called classes, and then how we can create objects from these classes in order to solve the problem. So what is a class? A class is meant to model an object in our problem. So let's say we had a pet store and we wanted to be able to model a dog in our pet store. So we might want to describe certain properties of the dog, such as the breed, the size, the age, the color, and the dog might have certain behaviors associated with it, such as it wants to eat, it wants to sleep, sit, run. These equate to programming in terms of the properties really are variables and the behaviors are functions. So what a class does is that it wraps both of these things together, all these related variables and functions, as one entity called a class. Now, a class is just a blueprint. What you're seeing now isn't actually a dog. It's just describing what a dog would look like and how a dog would behave. Where it becomes useful is when you instantiate, which is just a fancy word for create a dog that models our class. So for instance, you could see the Mastiff. It's large, it's 5 years old, it's black. The Maltese is a small dog, it's 2 years white. Or the Chow Chow, which is medium. I'm going to excuse myself. I just grabbed this picture. I just realized that medium is spelled wrong. But in any case, you get the idea. So a class is simply a template of what a dog will look like. But in the end, we actually have to create a dog that fits that model of our class. So let's see how this applies to JavaScript. So we're going to stick with our idea of creating animals. So in JavaScript, in order to create a class, this entity that's going to wrap these variables and functions together as one unit, we're going to write the word class. And then we have to give the class a name. Similar to what you might have done with like a function. You create a function to encapsulate a process, so you got to give the function a name. The syntax, though, I made an analogy to functions, but the syntax to a class is very different. All right, so we're going to write the word class and then animal, which is the name of the class. And then we're going to use the curly brackets to kind of help group all these functions and variables together as part of this model that we're creating for an animal. Now, the next thing that we're going to provide is something called a constructor. What that allows us to do is it allows us to specify some information when we first create the animal. So for instance, if you recall from the PowerPoint slideshow, we created dogs that had a particular name, an age, a size. So those pieces of information can be provided through this function called a constructor. Now notice I'm calling this a function, but unlike previous videos where you might have learned how to create a function by first writing the word function, you don't have to do that with a class. So a class, the functions are simply listed starting with their name and then followed with the parentheses. So for our particular case, when we create an animal, we want to specify what type of animal it is because we're making it a little more generic. We're not doing strictly a dog, we're just simply doing animals. And the next thing we're going to do is we're going to provide a sound that the animal makes. Now, in order to store these pieces of information in our class, we will create what's called a class variable. And in order to do that, we use the word this. This and then the variable that you want to create. Now, again, from previous videos, you've learned how to create variables using the word let, and you still could do that. For whatever reason, let's say you want to create a variable temp that does something, hello. You could still create variables like this in a class, but these are not considered class variables. These are considered simply variables of this particular function. Again, I'm not going to cover that right now. I'm going to focus on just the mechanics of what a class can provide. So we've created a class variable called this.type, and we've set it equal to the piece of information being passed into it. Here's where you have to kind of bring your knowledge of a function in to appreciate this. Let's do the same thing with sound. And we're going to leave it like this for now, because now I want to show you how you go and create a specific animal. So, before I do that, I've been doing these classes in a separate file called classes.js. Again, it's not a requirement. I just find that it's very nice and clean to put your classes in a separate file. Now, because it's in a separate file, you also have to bring it in like any other piece of JavaScript. So now that we've brought in our helper file, our classes file, we finally get to our script file. We bring that in, so we're able to go in here. So let's say we want to create a particular animal. So let's say we want to create Fido, which is a new animal. That's a dog, and it says wolf. So in order to create an object from this particular class, we will use the word new and then specify the class name. So Fido will be a new animal. This automatically goes over to our class structure and then calls the constructor. So whenever you create a new animal or new of any type of class, what you do then is that you go to the constructor and then you look at the particular pieces of information it requires. So it requires a type for the animal and a sound. All right, so we're going to make Fido be a dog, and it says wolf. And that's pretty much it. Now, how do we use the class now? Now, all we have right now are the variables. So let's make access. Let's retrieve some of that information from the class. So let's see what kind of animal Fido is. So I'm simply gonna say Fido.type. Now, you might be familiar with using a dot operator from your experience with JSONs. Again, think about what JSON is. It's a JavaScript object notation. So a JSON is an object. And what this variable is, it's an object from the class that we've created here. So let's see this in action, and we're going to see everything inside the console. All right, so there we go, dog. And we could have done the same thing with sound. Now, what I want to do is I want to go back to our class and then discuss the fact that an animal can have sounds and it can have behaviors in addition to properties. So let's say that an animal can also speak. And then for this, we're going to do a console.log. Actually, let me do this. Just to kind of reinforce the fact that a class can have what are called local variables. So let's string interpolate the type of animal it is. So let's say this.type, which is, again, I know it seems a little weird to put this.type, but you got to think of this as the whole variable name for the class. You can't just write type, you have to write this.type. This is the variable that's part of the class that's storing that information that got provided when we first created the animal. So this.type says, and now we're going to string interpolate the sound. And we're going to say this.sound. Okay, so now our animal has the ability to speak. And let's do a console log inside of here. That simply displays that message. So now when we go back to our script file, if we wanted to make Fido speak, and I'm just going to comment this out, we can simply say Fido speak. And what this did is that this called that particular behavior, that function from the class, and used the information that was particular to that animal. So that's the thing to note. This is specific to the information that was given as part of that animal. Now, again, it might make more sense for us to create a couple of other animals. So let's say Garfield is a new animal. Happens to be a dog, and it says meow. And let's create one more. Let's create Woody, which is a new animal. Let's say it's a bird. And we'll simply say that it chirps. And just to keep it consistent, let's put a exclamation point on all of them. All right, so now if we wanted to make Garfield speak, we could simply say Garfield speak. And let's make Woody speak as well. Oh, because I spelled it wrong. All right, so there you go. So we've instantiated, again, another fancy word for we've created objects from the class with each having its own unique pieces of information. Those pieces of information were stored inside the class using the class variables that start with the word this. And then we use the speak function, which is a behavior, a function that's associated with every animal, where we simply build a message that includes the type, the this.type of the animal, as well as the this.sound of the animal. And then it displays it within the speak function. So I kind of think I did this out of order. This should have been down here, but that's okay. So I think you get the gist. And we're actually already done number 4. Let's just ignore the discussion numbers. So let's say we want to create a pet store, which is an array. But now we want to populate the array with these animals. Well, it's as simple as doing this. So Fido, Garfield, and Woody. Now, just to show you, I mean, if later on we wanted to add another animal to the pet store, we could do something like this. Mickey is a new animal. It's a mouse, and it says squeak. So we created a new animal, and now we want to add it to the pet store. So we could use the push function of an array to simply push Mickey onto the array. Now, just to kind of show you this, let's do a console log of the pet store. Actually, you know what? I'm going to do this, but I just realized it's probably not going to tell you anything. It's just going to give you a bunch of objects. But that might be enough to prove to you that Mickey was added to the array. Let's paste that in here. Let's run these two things. Oh, actually, you know, it actually did display the whole class, so that's nice. So you can see here that inside the array, it's actually storing an animal, and it tells you some of the parameters of that animal. So the first animal is the dog with the wolf and so on. And then when we get this to this next array symbol, that's the second console log of the array. So you can see here, now Mickey was added as the last animal in the pet store. All right, so because we've used an array now, and I'm going to comment out both of these. Actually, I'll leave the last one just so you could kind of see it. Again, the fact that it's an array of objects that were created from a class doesn't change the fact that it is an array. So what we could do is we could do a for let I equal to 0, I less than pet store dot length, and then an I plus plus. Again, one of the beauties about working with an array is that it doesn't matter what's stored inside the array. You're still going to treat the array the same way in terms of how you go through the array. Now, this is a technique we've used in previous examples where we're going to create a specific variable to represent one of those animals from the store. So again, pet store is our array, and if I do pet store bracket I, we'll get one of those animals. Now, if I want to make one of those animals speak, I can simply say animal.speak. Now, again, if this starts to feel a little uncomfortable in that you're not making the connection between the Fido.speak and the Garfield.speak and the Woody.speak, Remember, what's being stored inside of our pet store? It is Fido, Garfield, Woody, and then Mickey down here. So as you go through that array and you pull one of those animals, animal is equal to either Fido, Garfield, Woody, or Mickey. So this is equivalent to being able to say Fido speak, Garfield speak, Woody speak, Mickey speak, because you're pulling it from the array. Now, as proof of that, let's see what you see on the screen, and there you go. We see the exact same uh, sounds or messages that we did at the very beginning where we individually pulled them out. Plus, we also see the additional one of Mickey, who's a mouse, and he says squeak. So going through, let's just do one more example. And this is just an idea of appreciating that you can now integrate classes or objects from these classes with your other fundamental concepts. So you could do mathematical operations. In this next example, and I'm going to do a little copy and paste here. We're going to see how we can make decisions as to who should speak. So we only want the dogs to speak. Everybody else is just going to say grr. So using our template from the previous discussion, we could say if animal. Now, if you recall, each animal has a type that represents the type of animal it is. So that's going to allow us to check. So animal.type is that variable that got passed into the class that represents the type of animal it is. So we can do a check of this against, let's say, dog. And if it is a dog, then we're going to make that animal speak. So notice the way I'm saying, we're going to check to see if the animal is a dog, and then we're going to make the animal speak. Because at this point, some students might kind of just do their own thing and assume that, okay, well, it's a dog, so I'm going to make the dog speak. No, there is no dog variable here. The variable is animal. The other thing that students might be a little confused is the fact that in the main program, the animal has the type. But when it comes to the class, we declared that variable as this.type. Again, realize this.type is because this is associated with the animal class. All right. So that means that whatever variable gets created from this class has a type variable. So again, this type variable is associated with it's associated with this object because this object is part of the animal class. Again, that was a whole mouthful. With more practice, trust me, it becomes a lot easier to work with classes. Plus, and you'll appreciate too how much classes are able to offer in terms of structure and organization for your code and reusability. So notice I didn't have to create separate variables for each of my animals. I simply created it as a new animal, and I automatically got those two variables of type and sound, as well as a behavior that's called speak. So let's just finish this example off, which is if it's not a dog, we're simply going to say grr. And actually, let's do a little bit more since we're here. And at this point, I'm not going to do string interpolation. I'm going to do URA. And let's put that animal type again. Animal type. All right, so notice we're at this bottom part here. So the first animal in our array is a dog, Fido. So we allow Fido to speak. And then for everything else, grr, you're a cat, grr, you're a bird, it's because none of those other animals have a type of dog. Garfield has a cat, Woody has a bird, and then Mickey is a mouse. So hopefully, again, like I said earlier, this comes with a lot of practice. And because this is part of a web development curriculum, you might start thinking, okay, how am I going to use this as part of web development? Again, you can find areas to do it. I'm not saying that classes have to be used for every single problem. but it's a good exposure to kind of complete your computer science knowledge. So let's go back to our presentation. Let's review what we've done. So we introduced a new concept called classes, which allows us to model objects in a problem. These objects consist of behaviors and properties which equate to functions and variables respectively. In order to create new objects of these classes, we use the word new followed by the class name, and then provide any additional pieces of information that are required in order to create that particular object of the class. What allows us to understand how to create the object is the constructor function, which is special to all classes. Again, that's that one function that allows us to provide the information in order to create an object particular of that class. Inside the class, we saw that the variables in the class take on a special syntax where they're preceded by the word this, and then followed by the variable name. The functions also take on a slightly different syntax in that they're not preceded by the word function, they simply just write the function name. So hopefully you're excited about being able to use classes as part of your program, and trust me, with time, you'll appreciate how much classes can offer as part of a bigger concept called object-oriented programming. Enjoy.